All right, welcome back to the Run Through Trails podcast. As always, I'm joined by my regular co-host, Lewis Moses. Lewis, how are you, mate? Still out in Gran Canaria?
Yes, still enjoying the sunshine. Christian and I were just chatting off air and saying how nice it is to have some sun on the back and on the face. You can probably see I'm glowing a little bit red. It's been super hot, but yeah, it's been lovely, and looking forward to coming back. But hopefully I can bring some sunshine back with me, because I hear it's not too good in the UK.
I mean, well, the rest of the week's looking decent. We've got Lulworth Cove this weekend, actually, which is on the coast, obviously, first weekend of March, end of Feb. And we were really concerned about conditions when we first started to plan the event. But it's looking sunny and no wind, so dream. But anyway, we'll kind of touch on that later. We're joined by actually another Canadian, so that's 2 weeks in a row. This week we got another athlete interview here with Christian Meier. So Christian is a Salomon athlete, ex-pro cyclist, also one of the co-founders and owners of Chance Running, who are the title partner with the Run Through Trails Girona event this year. So yeah, thanks for joining us, Christian. Lovely to have you.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. All right, perfect. So there's tons to talk about here, because I know you've just traveled back from Gran Canaria. But normally what we do with these podcasts, Christian, is kind of get a bit of background on the athlete, the guest, first of all. So let's stick with that format and start out by, give us a bit of background. I know you've got a background in professional cycling, but even growing up as a kid, getting into sport, what does your history look like, and how did you find trail running?
So I'm Canadian. I grew up on the east coast of Canada in a very, very rural part of New Brunswick. Nothing but farms and forest out there. So my mom's family, both my parents are German immigrants, so they met in Canada actually, but they both immigrated to Canada in about the 1970s. And so my mom's family, they owned a farm, a butcher shop, and a restaurant. So it was a sort of essentially farm to table concept years ago. And then my father was a machinist who worked in the local potash mine. So grew up in a family of very, very hardworking tradespeople, which meant that we were very, very hardworking young people growing up. It was working on the farm, and that was kind of that's what you did. So I found cycling when I was maybe 15. I discovered it just by picking up a mountain biking magazine at the local newsstand. And I just saw these bikes in this magazine, and they were sort of when this sort of enduro North Shore style mountain biking was starting. So they were these super cool dual suspension bikes with disc brakes. They essentially looked like dirt bikes without the engine. And I was just so fascinated by this whole concept. And probably read that magazine cover to cover about 150 times. And then, which actually is very interesting, because I really enjoy thinking back to that, when you used to have to wait a whole month till the next magazine came. You wouldn't just jump on the internet or Google and be bombarded with all the information in the world. So, just patiently waiting for that next issue. And then, just caught the bug for cycling, which is kind of a little bit random. I mean, I was the only kind of person in my family who really did sports, but just absolutely fell in love with cycling as a young guy, and raced quickly every discipline of cycling I could, from mountain bike, road, cyclocross, track. I got this idea that if I wanted to ride my bike every day, which was really my goal, I should just become a professional cyclist. So I decided at probably around 16, 17, I was going to become a professional cyclist. Then I went to Belgium just on my own, because I figured cycling is a big sport in Belgium. That's where I should go. So just luckily had an aunt and uncle who lived there. So I just, my last year of high school, I just went over last semester, did a few correspondence courses, just went to Belgium. Had no idea what I was going to do. I just thought I'd just get there and then figure it out. Then I met a few guys there who happened to be running like a junior team. They brought me on, did all this racing, was absolutely amazing. Came back to Canada, and then sort of progressed through the sort of junior and under 23 ranks um, nationally, and then eventually sort of, long story short, progressed into the world tour. So I went to the world tour at 24 after having raced multiple years at the continent level in North America. A lot of ups and downs, a lot of getting our heads kicked in, but just kind of grinding away. And I just had this ultimate dream that, well, I just thought it was going to happen. I just thought there's no reason I couldn't be a professional cyclist, all these other guys had done it. So I just thought as long as I follow this logical path, as if I was going to be a plumber or a lawyer, I mean, it's the same sort of thing. So I just need to do my time. And eventually got to the World Tour, and it was absolutely amazing. Moved to Spain with my wife. This was in 2008. We've been here in Girona ever since. So Girona was the first port of calling when we landed. And yeah, had an amazing time as a professional cyclist. Had the opportunity to ride the Tour de France, all the other big tours, all the other big races. And then we sort of towards the end of my career, we decided, especially my wife, that it was time that she had something to do for herself. She's been supporting me all those years. So we kind of brainstormed a bit and decided that we wanted to open a cafe. I had this really big passion for specialty coffee at the time. And my wife had always sort of been into hospitality, tourism, is something that she studied in school back in Canada. So kind of merged that, opened our first cafe in 2015, to La Fabrica. So we're going on 10 years actually in March. And that quickly progressed into opening another cafe, which quickly progressed into opening a bike store, which then eventually progressed into many things. I actually left professional cycling relatively young. I stopped at 31, just because I felt like I'd kind of reached a kind of a peak there, and I could probably settle in for another 5, 6, 7, 8 years, just cruising along, doing the same races, doing the same camps, and that didn't really appeal to me so much when I had this other side that was sort of really growing, and which was the business side. It was really interesting, so I decided to leave and focus on the businesses. Um, Always still maintaining a very sportive life. For me, sports has always been a really big part of my life, and I could never not be. I mean, I'm not going to say athlete, but I will say athlete because I absolutely love being an athlete. And then fast forward a little bit, COVID hit. We in Spain had a massive lockdown. 3 months not going outside, other than going to the grocery store, or we could walk our dogs actually. But so that was a pretty interesting time. And then when we first got back out of lockdown, we could start extra outside, but we had to stay within our municipality, which was quite small. So cycling didn't really wasn't that much fun then because you're just lapping around the block essentially. But the hills behind Girona and the Gavares were a part of that, so I sort of got a little bit into trail running, and it always been a little interesting to me in the past. But like as a professional cyclist back then, we didn't really run or do a lot of other sports just with that idea of injury or certain things like that. I think
Yeah.
now the mindset there has changed quite a lot, and actually quite a few cyclists are encouraged to run a little bit in the off season. But so I started kind of getting into this trail thing, running around the woods, discovered what is UTMB, from YouTube, which was amazing. We have a guy in Girona who owns a little running store here, or a little sports store, multi-sport store. And I'd spent some time running with him also, and he was a former winner of CCC, the
Yeah.
100K race at UTMB. And at the same time, I was sort of watching these YouTube films around UTMB, and it just blew me away, this idea of, running essentially 170K in the mountains, and that you could do that just traveling by foot, and in reality what is a relatively quick amount of time, 20 hours ish. So that was really inspiring to me, and I thought, wow, I want to try that and see what's possible, and see if I could do something like that. It was very, very difficult for me starting. Being a cyclist and having a long sporting history, the, let's say, cardiovascular part of the equation was too good. So I was able to actually run quite far straight away, but actually I didn't have any of the musculoskeletal depth to back that up.
Yeah.
So I was injured a lot. The first year I was injured all the time, from hip flexors, ITB stuff, like pretty much everything. I was hammered. The first year where I was kind of running, I probably spent about 6 months injured and 6 months kind of running. But it was such an addictive process, because I'd spent all this time in cycling where I felt I had reached a point in that sport where I didn't have much more progress. I felt like I was probably at my peak when I stopped, or close to it. And then I entered the sport of running, and I'm an absolute newbie, like a total junior in this sport. And I had so much to learn, and I saw this progress. And then, um, I have the type of personality where I kind of go down the rabbit hole and I really pursue something like 110%. And so I just threw myself into running and learning everything as much as I could, and training, and then eventually getting to the point where I could start to handle some decent mileage, which took about 2 years of consistent training to get to the point where I felt I could start to do the mileage to potentially be competitive in something of a longer distance race.
So that was always the goal from the start, was like the big 100 milers in the mountains, that UTMB inspiration? Because you must have started out with
Definitely.
some shorter races and stuff, right?
Yeah, I started with some shorter races, local stuff, 20Ks, just whatever I could kind of get into. Then I progressed relatively quickly, like up to 50K.
Okay.
Then it took a while. I did my first 100K, did a couple of 100Ks. But the reality is I still haven't even done that many, and compared to a lot of, the big champions. And yeah, it was amazing. It was an amazing journey, a lot of good times. And then things kind of started to click in 2023,
Okay.
and I had a pretty good season. I managed to win the TDS at UTMB, which for me was like a absolute sporting highlight of my life, probably. It was such an amazing experience to, I mean, the experience of running down the UTMB finish line for anyone is, I think, an exceptional experience. Um, just because you have the crowds, you have the mystique, I guess, of that finish line, in the trail world. And, it's just like, I think anybody who would come down that finish line first, or, the last person coming across the line, it's kind of like a goosebump sort of situation. You really feel that energy.
Yeah.
But to be able to do it, winning a race during that UTMB week is, I mean, it's exceptional. I mean, it's hard to describe, also because in running, you come to the finish line, generally you have time. Cycling, you're flying across the finish line at 60K an hour, and there's no,
Right.
it's like cross the line, it's done. But there, I mean, you cross the line, you can go back up and down. You can walk it in. I mean, generally you have a bit of a gap. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more, but you have the opportunity, it felt like, to be a lot more or to be a lot more present in running. So I remember just the feeling of coming into Chamonix and the feeling of crossing that line and just like having that moment right there and then to sort of soak in the atmosphere and then also soak in that accomplishment, right? I think in some sports it doesn't come until after because there's so much adrenaline and energy and things are going into these really sort of explosive finishes like in cycling that it might not be till later in the evening or the next day or something that you kind of feel that. But to be able to feel that in the moment and that amount of energy is something that's very exceptional.
I mean, there's also that added level as well. Like you've been out on the course for 20 hours or
Yeah.
whatever it's taken, probably just under 20 hours. That amount of time of being in your own head, you're not really in a pack, you're not in a group, you've not got, you might have some crew at some aid stations and stuff, but you got long periods of time in the dark, in the mountains, completely in your own head. And then to like descend into what is
Yeah.
the town center of Chamonix on UTMB
Yeah.
week and that madness, especially in first place. Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine. We were there this summer, and I dropped out of OCC. I didn't even want to go into town because I want to save that experience for when I can actually finish the race.
Yeah,
But
sure.
I know like Lewis was down there when his wife Gemma finished
Yeah.
OCC this year. And yeah, the atmosphere is unbelievable. So I can only imagine what it's like to plod through town in first place and just soak all of that in. It is something special.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because the TDS you come in through because you're coming from Tourmalet, so you're kind of running the last part of the race in reverse of what the other races would run, like UTMB,
Right.
or the
Oh, so you're
reverse of the
coming
way
in
the
from Les Houches and like in through
yep,
Galliance and up. All right. Okay.
exactly. So
Right.
when you first come into town, you kind of hit Main Street, and there's no barriers and anything, so it's sort of like you're just running through the people on the street.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's really interesting because the first part, it's just kind of like, people are kind of not really moving because they don't really know what's going on. And then when people start to realize what's happening, it kind of, they kind of spread out and let you come through. And it's not really until you hit the last, what's essentially probably the last couple of hundred meters that it's barricaded, right? So you spend
Yeah.
actually the last part just like it's kind of a weird sensation. You're just kind of like shuffling through the crowds, like trying to get through until they realize, okay, this is the TDS race, and they kind of start to spread open. But yeah, it's an exceptional feeling.
Yeah, we were there. We actually saw the. I'm going to ask you, Christian, for a bit of an explanation of the TDS because a lot of people listening to this will probably be very familiar with the OCC, the CCC, and UTMB. But what a lot of people don't realise is UTMB week is packed with other races, including the TDS and the MCC, and
Yeah.
we managed to capture the pairs race coming in as well, where people run as a
PTL,
pair,
yeah.
and the PTL, and they come the same way as you, I believe, into the town.
Yeah.
And we were
Yeah.
literally having to move people out of the way and say, move out of the way, move out of the way.
Yeah.
But it almost made it that little bit more special. It was incredible because it was almost like this surprise factor of, wow,
Yeah.
these people are coming down. So, yeah, do you want to give people a bit of an explanation, around the TDS who might not be
Yeah.
familiar with that in UTMB week?
Yeah, so TDS was a race that they originally conceived that doesn't, so all the other courses run pretty much all on the TMB course, which is Tour de Mont Blanc, which is a hiking route, which actually generally starts in Les Houches, not in Chamonix, but goes through Chamonix. And that's the hike that, a lot of people in the world be familiar with, which is, most people do it in about a week, does the whole lap. And then, so UTMB is essentially that whole route in one day. And CCC is the last 100 kilometers of that route. OCC is more or less, some exceptions, is a little bit mostly the last 50K. So a lot of those races run on that route, on that TBM. TDS was, which stands for Tour des Ducs de Haute-Savoie, which is they conceived as a different race pretty much all together. That starts in Courmayeur and finishes in Chamonix. And it's a much different route in the terms that it's much more rugged. Has about the same amount of climbing as UTMB, but in around usually 140K. The year I did it, we had snow and some other weather conditions, so it was a bit longer because we rerouted some sections. So you have about the same amount of climbing as UTMB, but in a shorter distance, and the trails are not as well trodden. So you think more of mountain single tracks, a little bit more technical, steep long climbs, and generally a less runnable course than UTMB would be. But for me, I think UTMB carries a lot of prestige and its own sort of mystique around the race. But to be honest, I think TDS is probably the most exceptional course of that week because the views, the mountains, the single tracks, and the areas that you go through are absolutely spectacular. And you go through these regions that are like Bourg Saint Maurice, Beaufort. I mean, they're really kind of authentic mountain towns. So you have this feeling of generally in France, they consider the TDS not necessarily a more prestigious race, but they hold it in very high standing, almost a little bit more than UTMB because they feel it's more of a mountain race, really. So, and it starts at it's on the Monday, so it's the first race of the week. Well, it starts on Monday night. I think MCC's at the actual first race of the week. So it's actually also very nice because what's nice is you get to enjoy the rest of the week being there.
Yeah.
You're done.
So,
Get it out of the
I
way.
mean, yeah, you get out of the way, you can hang out, you can cheer on your friends, you can do all these things because, as an athlete, a lot of times that last week is one, it's kind of nerve-wracking already enough, but like for elites especially, it's not a very social time, right? Because that last week, it can be very, dangerous isn't the right word, but hanging out in the village, meeting a lot of people, shaking a lot of hands,
Yeah.
it's a very easy time to get sick. And every year, multiple athletes don't end up on the finish line just in that last week of exposure to so many people. So we generally try to keep it super low profile. And then if you're racing UTMB, which is on, it's the last race, if you're leaving on Friday night, doesn't leave a whole lot to do the rest of the
Yeah,
weekend
you're
because
basically just missing everything because you're sat at home with your feet
exactly.
up trying to avoid like all of the
all the
like
fun
sponsor
stuff.
requirements and the parties.
Yeah,
Yeah, follow douche.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
I mean,
But
it
then,
is.
but to me, the thing that I always find a little bit, I wish the UTMB week did better, was that when you finish UTMB, it's over.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like it's for most of the UTMB people, participants, it's like Sunday they're finishing.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of this kind of little bit anticlimactic feeling of like you finish, but all the party, all the vibes, everything's done. And then you kind of like pack up and go home. And I almost
Yeah.
wish like they brought it a day forward so everyone finished on the Saturday and then everyone still had that opportunity to experience like the after, the celebration with other people. Obviously you have your maybe supporters of your family there. But like if you finish a little bit early on the Saturday, maybe you could still see all your other friends, still see other people before everyone goes home. It's the only thing I find a bit I don't like about UTMB.
Yeah, it feels
That
like of
UTMB
all the
specifically, that date. Yeah.
of all the races to finish on, you'd almost bump MCC onto the Sunday, bring everything else a day forward, and then have like the local and volunteer event as the last one, and everyone who's raced can come and cheer them on, or I don't know, like you say, something to kind of finish with a little bit of a bang. But then at the same time, I suppose it all builds anticipation into the big show, which is obviously UTMB is what everyone's there to kind of see. So yeah, I mean, it's an incredible week, and it's cool listening to your story. There's a million different paths we could go off on, but the one I wanted to kind of focus on was when you're already out in Girona. You've decided that kind of the cycling careers maybe coming to an end, you're starting to get a bit more invested in the trail running side of things and kind of discovering this whole new sport, which is really cool because you're coming from literally a world-class elite standard in cycling and then starting this new sport pretty much from scratch. And yeah, just a lot of parallels with kind of how I stumbled across the sport as well, and what's inspiring to me about it, and kind of the impetus behind these European events is purely that, like my own experiences of going to these places and just running on incredible trails with the most epic views, going through these little mountain villages all throughout Europe, and just finishing those types of races or runs or training camps or whatever with a sensation of kind of, I want to spend as much time here as possible. And me and Lewis talk about it a lot. Like it's a huge part of trail running that makes it so appealing. Is the travel and the places that you go to, the people you meet, like that holistic experience. And it sounds like that was a big piece for you. But a lot of the races that we're talking about here with UTMB, TDS, the big alpine stuff in the European Alps, you don't really have access to that terrain in Girona. So how would you say, because there's obviously a big endurance sports running scene, there's a lot of cyclists, a lot of triathletes based in Girona. How kind of established is the trail running scene? Is it big? Are there a lot of people engaged with it? I know you're obviously very integrated into it. Can you maybe tell our listeners a little bit about trail running in Girona and the scene in northern Spain?
It's exceptional. I mean, trail running in Catalonia, our part of Spain, our region of Spain that we're in, is probably one of the most popular sports. Definitely. I mean, this is not considering, football. But in terms of participation, it's probably one of the biggest sports, I would say. We have races every weekend, multiple per weekend, like sold out. You can do an ultra, I mean, there's everything from VKs to ultras to here they even have what they call marchas, which are a kind of a trekking division. So it could be like a part of that weekend. It's maybe like 10, 12 kilometers and you just hike it. So there's a really big appreciation for trail running. I mean, a lot of that was fueled early days by, some of the big local heroes like Kilian Jornet, who's Catalan. So when those kind of mountain sports, trail running, ski mountaineering, very big here in Catalonia. Girona has a really big scene. I mean, we're definitely spoiled because we have these sort of, like for me, leaving the house, I've got maybe 300 meters and I start on some really great trails through the Gavares, which are the little mountain range behind Girona. And then we've got the Pyrenees that are not that far away. So in the summer, I spend a lot of time there. But yeah, it's an exceptional place to practice endurance sport, no matter what kind of sport you do. Like you said, if it's cycling, triathlon, running, trail running, I think sometimes you take for granted, the kind of scene that you're in when you're here, because you realize after a while that it has this sort of way of making everything seem achievable. You're constantly surrounded by people who, just got back from riding the Tour de France, or, they just, won some ultra somewhere, or they're about to go to the Olympics for a triathlon, or they're about to go to Kona. Like, you're just
Well, like
surrounded
you
by
said, the guy down the road who owned a running store, who'd won
Yeah.
CCC. It's like, that's not a normal person to bump into.
So around here, when you talk about like, oh, yeah, I'm going to go and do UTMB, it's like, oh yeah, okay, cool. It's not like, oh, really? You're going to go run? It's just you take for granted that you're always surrounded by these amazing group of people, but like not in an egotistical sense, but just that, this inspiring thing of like everybody here is challenging or taking on these big challenges, has big goals. And, yesterday we had our group run, which is a Tuesday morning group run on the flat where we do some flat workouts through the overland store. And we've got I was doing the workout with Taylor Spivey, who Olympian, is going to do the T100 in Singapore coming up. And these are like people that show up on your local Tuesday run, So it's a really inspiring place for that. If it's trail running, if it's triathlon or cycling or any sport really, there seems to be like room for everybody. But also, what's really interesting is that from like trail running has always been a big thing here, but it hadn't yet. I mean, Girona is most famously known for cycling.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of the premier cycling destinations in the world for cyclotourism and triathlon. But the trail running scene, even though it has always been really popular locally, it didn't really have that reputation yet. Let's say externally that it's a great place to come and trail run. But interestingly, in about the last year, we see more and more people coming purely as trail runners. Sometimes people ride bikes and they also run a bit. But like yesterday, we had a guy. He's a guy here this week from Italy. Who came to Girona just to train. He's training for Chianti in March. He was third or fourth there last year, so like really high level runner. They're starting to see Girona as like this really cool place to go and holiday because it's a super beautiful place. Like Girona is a really special town because it's a little medieval city, walled. In the last 5, 6 years, it's become an absolute gem of a place for astronomy. We've always historically had El Salar de Can Roca, which multiple times has been the number one. I think 3 times they were number one restaurant in the world.
Okay.
That family and that group, the three brothers, they've opened other restaurants in Girona. There's more than a handful of specialty coffee shops. It's a clean city. It has a vibe. It's very accessible in terms of, like most people kind of you can get away with English and all this sort of stuff. So it's like a very unique city that it's amazing place to come on a holiday and tap all those cultural aspects, but then at the same time be this really cool
Yeah.
sport mecca.
That's it.
So it's like just hits all the spots, right?
Yeah,
Which is why we're
that's
still here.
it's really interesting, Christian, because I base myself in a place called Loughborough in the UK, which is a hotbed for particularly for sport. Alex Yee's based there for triathlon, for example. Tom Evans is based there for trail running, despite it not being the most amazing place for trail running. But we've got swimmers, athletes who constantly go into the Olympics, and you're right. It normalizes things, right? But it also shows you a path. It shows it can be done. It's possible. I think the big thing with Girona that you're describing here is the accessibility to the things that you need. And it's interesting that Chianti is coming up for people who are coming out there because it is a destination we considered. We came to Gran Canaria because my wife is doing Chianti. So we were looking for that warmer weather. I said to you before we came on the call, Girona is somewhere we may consider in the future.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued by a little bit about what you said as well about not being too far away from the Pyrenees, because one thing we used to do at Loughborough as well is we used to fly to Girona, but we travel to Font-Romeu in the Pyrenees, and we do our high altitude camps up there. Is that where you escape for like the really high climbing to get used to things like the climb for TDS, UTMB?
Don't even have to go that far. I mean, I just kind of day trip from Girona. It's about if I drive anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. Um, if I drive an hour, I'm in the real Pyrenees, and I can start doing, climbs of 1,000 meters vert in
Nice.
one go.
Nice.
Um, so we have Voltaire 2000, which is our kind of like most local ski station. So you can park at the bottom, go up, and then the next valley over is called Val de Nuria. Um, these places are spectacularly beautiful and yeah, high 3,000 meter peak sort of thing. A little bit more rugged. It's not, it's a bit more technical up there, but it's absolutely stunning when you go there. And there's so many trails and so many, it feels a little bit more, as much as I really love the Alps and I love all that, but somehow the Pyrenees have their own thing going on. You feel more kind of out there, a little bit more disconnected. There's less people, there's less refugios. It feels a little bit more wild. You have to plan a little bit more. You have to plan because there's not going to be as much places to get water or resupply or things like that. So I really like that ruggedness that we have in the Pyrenees. But yeah, I mean, I just day trip there from Girona. I go in the morning, come back, so I don't even have to go that far at all.
Amazing.
Nice. Yeah, it's ideal. It's such a cool spot. When I visited for the first time, how easy it was to just find amazing trails, great running. Because even we talked about it a little bit, Christian, when we met up in Girona a few weeks ago. Obviously, you've got access to some really nice single track, but even just what Girona is known for as far as gravel riding, like the extensive kind of, I guess what we'd call in the UK, like service roads, or maybe that's more of like a Canadian term. I don't even really know. But anyway, service roads, like double track roads,
Yeah.
accessible pretty much directly from the city very quickly, and essentially endless networks of fairly well maintained, like great running. It's the sort of stuff you'd train on even if you were training for like a road marathon, like really runnable, rolling, not huge elevation, but nicely undulating, just kind of exactly what you want to be running on. And that was a bit of the inspiration for the event that we've got in May, was that this terrain, not only is it great to train on, it's actually kind of perfect for a bit of a build into bigger mountain races in the middle of the summer. And obviously, like the climate helps a lot. I know May could be quite warm. So maybe, yeah, actually, that's interesting. In terms of late May in Girona, what type of weather conditions would you generally be expecting?
We're expecting you'd be hitting sort of by end of May, probably low mid 20s
Okay. Yeah.
Celsius, and probably mostly sunny, definitely. Our rainier periods are sort of that March, April. Um, but it will be usually spectacularly sort of green and sort of
Nice.
lush from that sort of spring. In May, also, we have usually these canola fields that are this bright yellow. Yeah, May is a very, very beautiful time in Girona. Perfect weather. When you start getting into end of June, early July, that July, August gets quite hot here. We're quite known for that.
Yeah.
But May is one of those perfect months. May and probably September are the best months, I think, for coming to do, some nice sports.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it ties in perfectly as well, because I know, Lewis, you've been talking about getting out to Gran Canaria to prep for Chianti, a little bit of heat acclimatization, some climbs, some kind of rockier terrain, runnable stuff. Again, super similar to the type of terrain and conditions that we're going to find in Girona kind of later in the year. So,
Yeah. I was just going to say, James, I think it's a really good point you make actually around the kind of introduction. Gemma and I were chatting out here. She was saying, like, why is Chianti so big? Everyone's there this year. You look at the start list; they're absolutely insane across the board as well. It's not just the golden ticket race, because obviously Chianti, the longest race out there, is going to be a golden ticket qualifier for Western States. But I did say, I was like, it's almost like the start of the season. It's almost like that first opportunity to go and test yourself on the trails, like from a UTMB perspective. Not many people fancy the Arc in the UK in January. Chianti is a lot more appealing, particularly European. So I think you're right. I think that May time in Girona serves a really good purpose for people who maybe either, maybe even beginner trail runners, right? I've not been there, but by the sounds of what you're describing, these trails would also be perfect for people who are introducing themselves to trails as well, because they're a little bit more, I guess, less technical than, say, the big Pyrenees, and a lot more accessible. Have I got that right?
yeah, totally different thing. Like super accessible, super runnable, even stuff verging on the point where you're like, yeah, would you even call this trail running? It's that mix between, road and trail, super accessible, not huge elevation. So, I mean, they were all factors that played in, but also, like you say, like Christian's described, you've got access to all that really technical big terrain as well within close proximity of the city. So it's there, but it is nice to have a range of different type of events and different types of, like say, almost a training race. That's kind of what it's positioned as. I know we're somewhat limited on time, so we can't not jump across onto the other side of what you do, Christian, which you mentioned earlier. There was a time in your life where you moved out to Girona, you set up La Fabrica and Espresso Mafia, you had the cycling store, and I think you were doing some cycling tours as well. And now obviously onto Overland and Chance and that whole kind of chapter of your life, that side to you. I mean, So how many businesses currently do you have a stake in or involved with, like, co-owner, co-founder?
Uh,
Because it's quite the list.
right now, there's probably what I'm sort of active in is probably around four of them.
Okay,
But there's probably five or six that I'm a part of, total. But yeah, I mean, I quite enjoy that. I'm someone that I love the creative part of starting businesses, um, which is always sometimes great. Sometimes, what works really well is that I have my wife, who is the really, really good at executing the businesses on a daily basis.
nice.
But my strength lies more in everything sort of from the conception through the branding through to um, ideas. I mean, it's this sort of creative thing that I have that these types of businesses fulfill for me. I'm a bit more project oriented, so like I said, I'm not necessarily really big into to managing. But on the trail side, it just felt quite natural to have like a place like we had already started a community probably a year or two before opening the running store. So we had quite a strong community of runners, and then the running store just kind of felt a little bit like an extension of that, an extension of a place for them to come and a place for us to have access to sort of like cool, unique brands. Like when we were stocking sort of Norda and these types of brands that um, were very difficult to find. I mean, in Spain and a lot of the sort of European market, it takes a little bit longer to adopt these cooler niche brands. Generally they're a little bit more expensive and these sorts of things. And we live in an area that's, still a bit more price conscious and driven. So it was an opportunity to kind of work with those brands and have a step in the door of, and a cool place for the community to gather. Then Chance kind of came more from this idea of starting into running. I was at a point where I kind of felt it would be interesting to see if you could run a business that had a really strong social impact, or in our case, more environmental impact. Um, that it didn't necessarily have to be one or the other to be a sustainable business. So Chance came from two sides of it. One, when I started into trail, I really couldn't find apparel that I thought was working very well for me.
Okay.
So I've always kind of also been interested in that apparel side and things that I've already been doing in the cycling world. So I thought, well, I mean, we can design something that's better here. And at the same time, we could do something that has a high environmental standard. So we do for example, for each shirt that we sell, we plant 2 trees. We remove 100 kilos of carbon, and we remove 1 kilo of ocean-bound plastic. So that's for each product that we sell, pretty much. So we've removed quite a few tons of carbon dioxide. So which we do through carbon offsets with Gold Standard, and we've got all our partners for tree planting also and for plastic removal. So that was one of the really big things there. And that sort of developed into really trying to develop world-class products. And some of the products that we have now coming down the pipeline, I think are unique in the running world, especially the trail running world. Like we've got some products coming that are on the absolute far spectrum of sort of lightweight. Last year, my complete kit that I was wearing at UTMB, shorts and t-shirt, weighed less than 120 grams combined.
Okay.
So these are some things that we're working on, and then obviously we've got sort of all the other products that we work on. So that's been really exciting. It's been a super cool project, and we're seeing some great growth, and also just we noticed that sort of outdoor and trail running community, especially, they want to adopt these types of things. They care about the environment. They care about where they run. Our playground is the mountains, and we want to take care of that. We want to do the best that we can to do our part, and offer an option. I mean, by no means is I mean, the whole sort of idea of sustainability and all these things is a very, very complex world. But we want to offer a good option for people who want to have that in mind. While at the same time, if they actually also only have in mind performance, we still want to be that number one option, So that's what we're trying to balance.
Yeah, that's a difficult line to walk, isn't it? To give like ultimate performance and quality whilst also being sustainable with an eye on the environment, and also then, a cool aesthetic and like a nice brand vision, and having that fit in with all the things that you do. Because that's one thing that I will say for my experiences with all of the businesses that you own, or at least the ones that I've interacted with. Like I told you when we spoke, that I think La Fabrica might be the best cafe I've ever been to in the world. And it's definitely somewhere that I'm going to come back to every single time for a bowl of porridge and a coffee every time I'm in Girona. So that's like a simple recommendation for anyone listening, is that's the place to go. But even just like the aesthetics of the store, the way things are presented, the way you guys handle the social media, and then even testing out some of the kit while I was there, you really can tell like a lot of thought's gone into it, and it's incredibly high quality. And it's interesting from an outsider's point of view, and I wonder if this is something you're aware of or something that you've actively integrated. But when I think of like road cycling, I think of people who do, they spend a lot of money on kit. They tend to be into aesthetics. Like they look good. The bikes are super clean, sleek. Like even going into mountain bikes and stuff, the aesthetics of bikes is something that I think is whatever. It's really cool. And generally people that are into those sports are really into the kit. So do you think you've brought that over a little bit from the cycling into the apparel and the design and the branding of these companies?
Definitely. I mean, I think like looking nice, feeling good makes you run good.
For sure.
Everyone wants matching stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's kind of like at the end of the day, you're just trying to produce products and things that you would like to wear. I mean, that's generally what we're trying to do. And there's no reason you can't look good and perform well at the same time. So that's kind of always been our idea. And that's something, like you said, from cycling is a very, very standard thing and a standard way to look at it. It's like, it's very aesthetic led.
Yeah.
Especially now, I mean, for most people in cycling, is performance the number one thing, in terms of, I mean, by that, I mean aerodynamics or certain things like that. Obviously comfort is a high priority in cycling because you sit on the saddle for so long. But a lot of big consideration is the aesthetic more than anything, which is a lot of times just simple things in colors and designs and things like that. It's not sort of overly complex, but you spend time in the morning, dressing yourself to go out in the street or go to work or do things like that. So I think more and more the consumer nowadays is trying to, they kind of bring that level of aesthetic across their daily life, if that's sport or like I say, casual wear or whatever you have. So yeah,
definitely. I mean, it's one of the things in running as well, aside from all the travel and stuff. Kit wise, it's pretty minimal. You don't really have to spend a huge amount of money to do a lot of trail running. You don't really need much stuff. So the stuff
compared
that you
to
do
cycling,
buy,
definitely not.
well, yeah, exactly. Or like ski touring, mountain biking, all this stuff is super expensive. So it is an incredibly accessible sport. But then that means for those of us that value aesthetics and fancy kit, you've got a few quid to spend on a good pair of shoes and nice gear. So I mean, we could talk for ages. We haven't even gone into really any of your running or any of your plans for this year. We haven't talked about Gran Canaria, but I know that we do have a bit of a limit on time. I just wanted to say, I'm super excited for the partnership to be working with you guys on this event coming up. I really just genuinely think that Girona is such an incredible spot that doesn't quite, or at least in my circles and like my understanding, have the recognition that it probably should have internationally as a running destination. And I think, like you say, you're seeing that naturally happen, which is obviously really good to hear. And I think is something that's only going to grow. And yeah, I just encourage anyone that's listening, whether you've been to Girona before or not, just to head on over, do some training, come to the event, whatever you're going to do. But definitely to visit that part of the world, because it is just an incredible place to go and train. Maybe we can talk Lewis into a bit of a training camp out there around the event in 2026.
Well, yeah, I've been speaking to John, who might be coming on the podcast, who's out there currently, about potentially going out there to do something with the Alpine Run project. And he speaks so highly of the place as well. So yeah, I'm sure I'll be there at some point in the near future. And I'm not a coffee drinker, but you're even selling it to me, James, with the porridge. So I'll have to visit the coffee shop as well.
Nice. All right. Well, to wrap things up, Christian, what are your plans? I mean, we know that you've just not had the race that you'd hoped for in Transgran Canaria with a DNF in the Classic. Have you got long-term plans? Obviously, you're coming back from injury. What are the goals this year?
Yeah, so like you said, sort of Transgran Canaria didn't quite go as I'd hoped. So now just back to training. Going to figure out a nice race in April probably. Then in May, teammate of mine, Ryan Sands, is racing two teammates racing Cocodona 250.
Oh, cool.
Ryan and Courtney. And so I'm going to go and do some crewing. The plan is to do some crewing and pacing for Ryan at Cocodona.
Nice.
Then maybe spend a little bit of time in the US. And then probably I'm going to look at something like potentially Andorra UTMB.
Nice.
To do get into the mountains again. You know, there's these sort of flat running races for me. The runnable races are not really my forte. I like to get the poles out and get into the climbs. So maybe Andorra, and then one more race before UTMB. Cool. Go to UTMB again this year. Yeah.
So UTMB is the big goal for the year.
Definitely. Yeah.
The little race that you're talking about in April, we're not going to see you out in canyons, are we? Not going to be racing me at the 50K.
No. Well, to be honest, maybe I'll be there, but I won't be racing.
Okay.
No.
Nice. Yeah. Oh, exciting.
Well,
Cocodona will be quite the experience. Anyway, I know we've got to wrap things up.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe what we'll end up doing is getting you back on at another point to talk a bit more running. But yeah, super cool to have you on. Really appreciate your time. And like I say, just massively honoured and excited to be partnering with you guys and with Tom and all the guys at Overland and working together on the event.
Can't wait to see you guys in May.
Yeah, me neither. All right, awesome. Well, let's leave it there. Thanks a lot, Christian. Good luck with the training.
Guys.
Cheers, Lewis. Enjoy the sun out there. Give my regards to Gemma. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode. So thanks, everyone, for listening. If you've not entered any of our races yet this year, go and check out everything we've got on offer in the UK and across Europe at runthroughtrails.com. And if you get a chance, go and head over to Chance Running and check out all the things that these guys are doing. Some incredible kit. And we'll speak to you all soon. All right. Cheers.
Cheers, James. Thanks, guys.
See ya.
All right. See you later.